Thank you very much for this kind invitation, and thank you, Excellencies, and especially Papanas for organizing this extremely important meeting. Let me share my screen with my presentation. So what I'm going to talk about today is about food systems transformation and what is the motivation and the science behind of what we are doing and how we are trying to pursue this and how we hope we can work together with the governments. I have three key messages today. The first is food system transformation is necessary, but it's not easy, it's complex. Second, we need models and understanding of how to use them to handle the situation that we are facing. And third, we need to bring science into the governance process to be able to develop appropriate food system transformation, which we are looking. So let me start with the first key message. Why we need to focus in the agri-food systems. And we call it agri-food systems because it's broader than just food. Food is built and processed in the peri-urban areas, but the production, the agricultural part is also extremely important. That's why also we think it's important to bring the agricultural component to the food system component and not just focus on the food part. Now, first of all, as we all know, the world is not on track of achieving the SDG 2. Before even COVID-19, we had 690 million people suffer from chronic hunger, and nearly 60 million grow in 5 years. 144 million people, 21% of children under 5 years of age are stunted, 47 million are wasted, and 38% are overweight, and more than 2 billion people suffer from overweight and obesity. So those challenges are putting us off track and off path of achieving SDG 2. And all these elements have been extremely exacerbated by COVID-19. The number of undernourishment is projected to increase between 115 million people more undernourished, which will put us in 2030 by 900 or more million people undernourished, completely off track of the zero hunger SDG 2. At the same time, rural poverty is projected to increase substantially, and basically we're going to lose 1 decade of reduction of extreme poverty. But not only that, when we did the analysis of healthy diets and cost of access to healthy diets, we found that 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. So a healthy diet is 5 times more expensive than an energy caloric sufficient diet, and 60% more expensive than a nutrient sufficient diet. So that means that something is not working well. We are not providing what is needed to be able to achieve not only reduction of undernourishment, but at the same time to be able to achieve the reduction of overweight and obesity, which is required to reduce the non-communicable diseases, which is a medium and long-term problem for our governments. So this requires a change. This requires a significant transformation, because making diets more affordable is not a simple issue. You don't want to affect producers. You want producers also to get returns of what they do. But at the same time, you need to benefit consumers so that they can have and be able to access. So it combines not only increasing efficiency in production and, for example, reduction of food loss and waste, but also it combines with an increase of income so that people can have better access to this type of diets. So it's both elements. We cannot look only at the supply side, we have to look at the supply and demand side. And that's part of the system approach. The system approach is to move away from silos and is to try to combine all the elements that could be affected, and of course, natural resources. Now, humanity is waging a war on nature, as the Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez said in the State of the World at Columbia University in 2020. Why? Because our biodiversity is collapsing. 1 million species are at risk of extinction. The ecosystems are disappearing before our eyes. Deserts are spreading, wetlands are being lost. Every year we lose 10 million hectares of forest. In 2019, carbon dioxide levels reached 148% of pre-industrial levels. Today, we are at 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming and already witnesses unprecedented climate extremes and volatility in every region and in every continent. And we are headed for a thundering temperature rise of 3 to 5 degrees Celsius if this continues as we are going. So food systems are one of the main reasons we are failing to stay within our planet's ecological boundaries. And that's when we need to look and think carefully. So the challenge is complex. We have to produce more, we have to produce cheaper, we have to increase income, but we have a huge restriction of our ecological boundaries. we cannot keep operating the way we are doing. So that means increasing efficiency and changing the way in which we produce to be able to achieve this goal. And that's where we believe we can work on this transformation together with Indonesia so that we can achieve this important change. They are by far the largest economic systems, the agri-food systems, measured in terms of employment and livelihoods and planetary impact. So worldwide, there is 1.2 billion people which are employed through agricultural food systems, production, harvesting, services, processing, and distribution. So when you look at the whole value chain and the whole elements of the value chain, that's the amount of people being employed by the agricultural sector and by the agricultural value chain system. And there is 3.5 billion people or livelihoods which are also touched as a result of what we do in this agriculture. And not only that, poverty and inequality are endemic to the systems, and they are endemic to the rural areas. 80% of extreme poor live in rural areas. And of these, 75% earn some part of their living through agri-food systems. So there is no way we will be able to achieve SDG 1, move out of extreme poverty, and SDG 2 if we don't combine them together and we don't look at the rural transformation. And the rural transformation is a continuing process. It's a continuous process that moves from extremely rural areas to peri-urban areas, what we call the catchment areas, and then to big cities. But just between the rural and the peri-urban, the catchment cities where people start to move towards cities when they do migration out of rural areas, there's a significant potential to transform our food system by extending value chains. Because, for example, the catchment areas should have access to electricity, should have access to infrastructure, which will allow them to do the processing of what we produce in the rural areas. So again, there's significant potential to create a difference and a change. This just to show how we decompose the jobs, 1.28 billion jobs in agriculture and 3.2 billion jobs in service, in livelihoods being affected by agriculture. The pie chart next to the table is showing the distribution across the different sectors. For example, we see that food processing, food services, and distribution services have a 60% share of the sector, which tells us again that it's not only the production area, but it's also how important the services are. Now, what we know today is that around 35% of these jobs are being at risk because of COVID-19. And if we look at the distribution and we look at the gender composition of these three areas of 60% is mostly females. So again, this COVID-19 is not only affecting labor, but it's also affecting even more females, which is increasing even more the inequalities and the differences that we need to minimize in this sector. Now, we need to transform our world, and the main title and core aspiration of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development and the SDGs is how we can achieve them in the years that we have left. We need to change at planetary scale, and we need to define a collective pathway for transition in sustainable development. And there is a concept that normally we don't take into account. The environmental issues, for example, emissions produced by the agricultural sector, are not just affecting one country, it's affecting the world. So it's a global public good that is being affected by this externality. And there are goods, public goods at the level of the country that also could be affected, water, soils, etc. But if we have this concept of what is global and a public good and what is a private public good, then we can understand the dynamics and the incentives that we need to put in place. Access to healthy diets is a private individual good so that individuals can have access to these healthy diets. But if I am going to achieve the access to healthy diets, and to do that, I will create more emissions in the world, then I will be affecting a global public good. And that's where I need to balance all the countries and all the regions of the world. It's not just an issue of one country, it's an issue that affects the whole global public good. So we need to be very careful to differentiate these issues to be able to understand what is going on. Now, what is transformative change? So transformative change differs from evolutionary or chaotic change in that it is intentional change based on societal agreements and factual understandings and achieves outcomes at the scale. The relevant societal agreement in 2030 Agenda is, of course, the achievement of the SDGs, including the Paris Agreement and the Addis Ababa Action Agreement. Factual understanding is knowledge that meets the test of science, and what is missing is the pathway to knowledge that supports effective action. And here is where we think that we need models and understanding of how to use them to handle this situation. One of the biggest efforts we are doing as part of the summit is to try to bring this modeling framework that will allow us to understand for every policy that we can implement what we call the game changer policies to create this agri-food system transformation. What are the consequences? What are the impacts? What are the trade-offs? What are the synergies? So having this structure of modeling will allow us to look at this transformation of this agri-food system. Why? Because we need to scale up climate resilience across our food system. We need to intervene along the food supply chain to lower the cost of nutritious foods, as we explained before. We need to integrate humanitarian development based building policies in conflict areas, because conflict, we know, increases undernourishment, and we need to control for that. We need to find solutions. We need to pursue the dietary partner patterns with low impact on health and environment. We need to strengthen economic resilience of the most vulnerable, and also increase economic resilience of production. And we need to tackle structural inequalities, ensuring interventions are proper and inclusive. And normally we focus too much, or we focus enough on poverty and extreme poverty and undernourishment, but we also need to focus on inequalities. Because if we don't reduce inequalities in parallel to reducing extreme poverty and undernourishment, we are not going to be sustainable. We will go back into extreme poverty, we will go back into undernourishment. The only way this will be sustainable over time is by reducing inequalities. The important thing is how all these elements fit together and how we can bring them together so that we can do proper assessments. Now, the idea is that we want to understand and to measure what we call the trade-offs. And the trade-offs among the SDGs have not normally been touched. And whatever policy we implement to achieve SDG 1 or SDG 2 or SDG 3 or 4, it will create some trade-offs. And it could also create positive synergies if we do them together. That's why we want to make it important, and we want to bring it up into the discussions. So whatever path the country decides to move, it's important that they understand what are the trade-offs and the synergies of their actions, of their policies, so that they can minimize those trade-offs, or they can take a different path which could be more efficient to achieve that. What we know today, for example, is that moving into healthy diets will improve the reduction of NCDs, but will also improve, depending on the type of diet, the effects over the environment. So we now know that, how we can accelerate that process and how we can do the transformation that we need to achieve that. And for that, we need to better understand the trade-offs, especially between SDG 1 and SDG 2, which is important. Now, our vision on this, and where we want to complement our efforts with the government of Indonesia, is we need accelerators, because the change needs to move very fast. And we have designed 4 accelerators in FAO. First is data, but especially real-time data, new data, and Indonesia has been leading on situation rooms, for example, of early warning systems. How we can use these accelerators on data to inform better, to make better decisions. Second, we need to use technology, and we need to understand technology properly. What works, what doesn't work for the country, for the realities. What is the evidence of each of the different choices of science you can do to be able to resolve the problem? And also we need to bring innovation. We need to be flexible. Digital technologies, flexibility to be able to adjust to the situation. We're moving into a world of automation. We're moving into a world of integration. We're moving into a world of digital technologies with digital markets and platforms. So how we can accelerate that and build that up in the country. But to be able to do and accelerate in those 3 accelerators, which we can move very fast, we need to have what we call the complements. And those could slow down. That's why the arrow goes in a different direction, a little bit the other 3 accelerators. But it's important to have them in place, because we want to be sure that we have the governance in place, the institutions in place, to avoid inequality increase, to avoid concentration of market power, to avoid problems that we normally know these technologies and innovation could create. But we also need to have the human capital. Because the last thing we want is that the automation process and the digitalization process will create more unemployment. The rural sector and the agricultural sector is significantly big enough, and we need to avoid that. And for that, we need to build capabilities. We need to have a labor supply that is ready to match that labor demand. So those accelerators for us are crucial, and that's something that we need to look very carefully. Now,
do apologize, Mr. Maximo, you have 1 minute left.
Sure. So how we plan to address these cognitive challenges with models? We are developing models that will simplify the reality, that will help us to assess the different scenarios and the different impacts, to see what is the synergies, what are the trade-offs, and what we can do and how we can accelerate the path to achieve SDG 1 and SDG 2. And that means bringing reason, explain, to design, to communicate, to act, to predict, and to explore options. We can do this. We have the framework in place, we have the infrastructure in place, and we need to build up so that you can make the best possible decisions, understanding what are the costs and the benefits of those decisions. That will allow us to bring all the 5 food security action tracks together and to capture those synergies and those trade-offs, which are crucial. That's the way we move out of silos and we work in a systematic approach. And that is central for us. And that's why these models, which are global, but also at the country level, could help us enormously to understand the effects at the national, subnational level, and combine that with territorial approaches so that you can move forward in a way of improving and being more effective and efficient. So let me just finish by saying of the importance of bringing these governance elements into the decision process, how models can help into build these complements and this governance institutionality, and how we can bring together knowledge of opportunity to bring solutions to the country and to move forward in this transformation which is needed and to involve all the stakeholders into it. It is essential for us to start modest, to test and to validate so that we can bring the solutions that we need to avoid a situation like we are facing today, a situation where we are in the risk of losing everything if we are not careful. We need to create a big change, and we need to be very careful to increase our resilience to risk and to uncertainty, where we don't know what are the consequences. So we need to be prepared for that, and that's why the summit is central in this process. Thank you very much. And essentially, I think the point is for sure, as it was mentioned, that we need to increase access to healthy diets. And there is a definition of what a healthy diet is, which includes the concept of diversity. But the problem today is that the access, the cost of accessing them is unaffordable to a significant amount of the population in the world, 3 billion people. And how to change that? That's the question. And here is where we need to combine efforts, both on the supply side, but also on the demand side. And I think, as it has been said, on the demand side is a behavioral issue. We need to change the way people behave towards more nutritious food, because that will increase also the demand of it and therefore access to it. It requires also more information to consumers. Sometimes we miss that and we don't provide the detailed information. And there is some experiences like the labeling system, for example, in Chile, which has been pretty successful from where we can learn, which is better to the lighting system. For example, we have shown to be more effective than the simple lighting system. But on the producer side, here is where we need to understand that what we have observed in COVID-19 is important, because it has shown us one more time of the importance of food to be able to move across borders and within countries, across parts of the country. And Indonesia, as you said, is complex in the sense of transportation and how to cover all the islands. So again, we need to look at the logistical side. We need to assure that the logistical side can operate properly to distribute the food, because if not, when we are talking of more perishable food, it will be problematic. We will increase food losses and waste. So we need to be very careful on the logistical side. That's a lesson learned from COVID-19. But we also need to assure that trade works. It doesn't make sense to think that as a result of COVID-19, we need to move into self-sufficiency. We understand that's impossible. There are countries that don't even have rivers, like Cape Verde, for example. How those countries that don't have rivers can grow food to satisfy their demand? Mobility of food is needed, and that's what we need to assure in an efficient way in proper mobility of goods, and that's where we need to facilitate and improve trade and find which are the constraints and how we can remove them. And here, what we learn also is the role of intra-regional trade. We focus too much on global, but there is huge opportunities of intra-regional trade, and that's something that I think Indonesia can explore. And also on the production, and that's where innovation can come, the accelerators I was referring to. I think in most of our countries, we have still a significant potential to grow and to improve and to be more effective in the way we use our natural resources. And that's where digital technologies can play a role, but also knowing and bringing all the scientific evidence on what every technology can tell me. And we don't need to focus on one, we can focus on a package of a menu of technologies to resolve the bottlenecks we have. So again, supply and demand has to be taken together in a system approach, understand the trade-offs, and also the synergies. Sometimes doing things at the same time helps a lot and create positive things. But we need to understand those so that you can choose the correct path to achieve SDG2. But thank you very much.